I still remember the exact moment I decided to destroy Marcus Whitmore. It was a Tuesday in September, and I was standing in the hallway outside my father's hospital room at Mercy General in Portland, Oregon, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hands, while the doctor explained that the stress-induced heart attack could have been prevented if my father hadn't been carrying the weight of financial ruin on his shoulders for the past 6 months. My name is Hannah Bennett, and I was 29 years old when I realized that sometimes the only way to get justice is to take it yourself. The fluorescent lights above me hummed with that irritating frequency that makes everything feel more sterile and hopeless, and I could hear my mother crying softly through the door. That sound of her breaking apart was what sealed it for me. Marcus Whitmore had systematically destroyed my father's construction company through a series of underhanded business deals that I later learned were perfectly legal but morally bankrupt. He had swooped in when Bennett Construction was bidding for the Riverside Plaza project, a contract that would have saved our family business, and through connections with the city council members and promises of kickbacks, he ensured the bid went to his own development firm instead. Then he bought out our major suppliers at premium rates, which left us unable to complete our existing contracts. My father, Richard Bennett, had spent 35 years building that company from nothing, and Marcus Whitmore destroyed it in less than a year because he wanted the commercial properties we owned on the east side of Portland. I had done my research in those weeks while my father recovered, sitting in my tiny studio apartment in the Pearl District, scrolling through business records and news articles and social media profiles until my eyes burned. Marcus Whitmore was 42 years old, divorced twice, no children, and absolutely ruthless in his business dealings. He owned Whitmore Development Group, which had annual revenues in the hundreds of millions. He drove a black Mercedes S-Class. He wore custom-tailored suits from a shop on Fifth Avenue in New York. He was photographed at charity galas and fundraising dinners, always with a different woman on his arm. And according to every source I could find, he was completely untouchable. The man had lawyers and accountants and politicians in his pocket. There was no legal recourse. That wouldn't take years and cost money we didn't have. So I decided to go a different route. The plan formed slowly, like ice crystals spreading across a window. I would get close to him, make him trust me, maybe even make him care about me. And then I would systematically take apart everything he valued, the same way he had done to my family. It sounded simple when I laid it out in my mind during those sleepless nights. But executing it would require me to become someone else entirely. Someone calculating and cold and willing to use any means necessary. I had never been that person before. I was Hannah Bennett, who taught 3rd grade at Bridal Mile Elementary, who spent her weekends at farmers markets and yoga classes, who believed in kindness and second chances. But grief and rage have a way of reshaping you into something you don't recognize. I started by changing everything about myself. I took a leave of absence from teaching, claiming family emergency, which wasn't exactly a lie. I used the last of my savings to buy clothes I would never normally wear, sleek dresses and heels that made me feel like I was playing dress-up. I got my hair colored a deeper shade of auburn and cut into a style that framed my face differently. I learned how to apply makeup in a way that made me look sophisticated instead of sweet. I joined the same gym Marcus used, started going to the same coffee shop on Morrison Street where he picked up his morning espresso. I engineered coincidental encounters until I became a familiar face, just another attractive woman in his orbit. It took 3 weeks before he actually spoke to me. It was a Friday morning in late October, and the coffee shop was crowded with the usual rush of downtown professionals. I had positioned myself near the pickup counter wearing a navy blue dress that I had seen similar women wear in his social circle, and I was pretending to check my phone when I heard his voice for the first time up close. "Excuse me, I think they called your order," he said, and when I looked up his eyes were this piercing gray color that reminded me of storm clouds. He was taller than I expected, maybe 6'2", and he had this presence that filled the space around him. The kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. "Thank you," I said with a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else. "I'm always so distracted in the mornings." He smiled back and it was warm and genuine, and for a second I almost forgot why I was there. "I'm Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Hannah," I replied, and shaking his hand felt like making a deal with something dangerous. We talked for maybe 5 minutes about nothing important. The weather, the traffic on the Morrison Bridge, how the city was changing, but I could see him assessing me the way someone evaluates a potential acquisition. By the time I left with my coffee, I knew I had planted the seed. Over the next few weeks I made sure to cross paths with him regularly. A comment here, a shared laugh there. I learned his patterns and his preferences. He liked women who were intelligent but not challenging, beautiful but not high maintenance, interested in his world but not part of it. So, that's what I became. I molded myself into his ideal, and he never once questioned whether it was real. The first official date happened in mid-November. He asked me to dinner at Le Pigeon, one of those restaurants where the menu doesn't list prices and the sommelier knows everyone by name. I had never been anywhere like it before, and I had to watch videos on YouTube to learn which fork to use for what course. I wore a black dress that cost more than my monthly rent used to be, and I felt like an imposter. But when Marcus looked at me across the table with candlelight reflecting in his eyes, he seemed to see exactly what he wanted to see. We talked about art and travel and his recent acquisition of a historic building in the Pearl District that he was converting into luxury condos. He never mentioned my family or Bennett Construction. To him, we were just collateral damage in his path to success, probably names he wouldn't even remember. I should have felt triumph sitting there listening to him talk about his empire, but instead I felt this creeping discomfort that I pushed down deep. He was charming, I couldn't deny that. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. When he talked about his childhood growing up in a trailer park outside Eugene and working construction jobs to pay for community college, I saw glimpses of someone who might have once been decent, before ambition corroded everything else. But then he would say something about crushing the competition or making tough calls that weak people couldn't handle, and I would remember exactly who he was. The relationship progressed faster than I had anticipated. By December we were seeing each other 3 or 4 times a week. He took me to the Christmas tree lighting ceremony at Pioneer Courthouse Square. We had drinks at the rooftop bar at the Nines Hotel, overlooking the city lights. He bought me gifts, expensive things that made me uncomfortable, a cashmere scarf, diamond earrings, a weekend trip to Vancouver Island. I accepted everything with practiced gratitude, while mentally cataloging each item as evidence of how easily money flowed for him, while my parents struggled to pay their mortgage. My father was home from the hospital, but he looked 10 years older. My mother had taken a job at a grocery store to help with bills, and here I was drinking champagne and pretending to be falling in love with the man responsible for their suffering. The worst part was that I was good at it, the pretending. I had always thought of myself as honest to a fault, but it turned out I could lie with my whole body. I could lean into Marcus's touch and laugh at his jokes, and look at him with soft eyes that suggested I was developing real feelings. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice kept asking what that said about me. Whether destroying him would also destroy whatever was left of the person I used to be, but I silenced that voice because the alternative was letting him win. Letting him continue his life of luxury and success, while my family picked up the pieces of everything he had shattered. New Year's Eve, he took me to a private party at a mansion in the West Hills, the kind of place with a circular driveway and actual marble columns. Everyone there was wealthy in that effortless way, where money is just a given, not something you worry about or even think about much. I wore a silver dress that caught the light, and I smiled until my face hurt, and I made small talk with people who would never understand what it was like to watch your parents lose everything. Marcus introduced me as his girlfriend, and there was pride in his voice, possession, like I was another successful acquisition, and I played the part perfectly, touching his arm, laughing at his stories, being exactly what he wanted. At midnight, when the countdown ended, he kissed me, and it wasn't the cold, calculated thing I expected. There was something genuine in it, something that made my stomach twist because it felt real and I didn't want it to be real. I wanted him to be a monster I could destroy without hesitation, but he kept showing me these flashes of humanity that complicated everything. Afterward, on the drive back to my apartment, he talked about the future, about plans he had for expansion, properties he wanted to acquire. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. He mentioned the East Side properties, the ones that used to belong to my father. He talked about how he got them for a steal because the previous owner had some financial troubles, didn't even remember the name, just another deal in a long line of successful deals. I stayed quiet and still in the passenger seat, watching the streetlights blur past while rage burned in my chest. This was what I needed, this reminder of his callousness. The fact that he had destroyed my family so thoroughly that he couldn't even remember doing it. When we got to my building, he walked me to the door and said he wanted me to move in with him. His penthouse in the Pearl District had plenty of space, and he was tired of saying goodnight. I told him I needed to think about it, but we both knew I would say yes. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for, access to his private life, his files, his weaknesses. I moved in during January. The penthouse was exactly what I expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the Willamette River and Mount Hood in the distance. Designer furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. A kitchen with appliances that probably cost more than a car. My studio apartment had fit my entire life into 2 rooms. But here there was so much empty space, it felt lonely. Marcus gave me a key, and told me to make myself at home. He had a housekeeper who came twice a week, and he was usually at the office until 7 or 8 at night, which gave me plenty of time to explore. I started carefully, looking through his home office when he was out, photographing documents on his computer, learning the details of his business operations. What I found was worse than I had imagined. Whitmore Development Group had a pattern of targeting struggling businesses and properties, offering seeming salvation before systematically destroying them and acquiring everything at bankruptcy prices. My father wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. There were families in Seattle and Eugene and Bend who had lost everything the same way. Marcus Whitmore was a predator dressed in expensive suits, and I had all the evidence I needed to expose him. But then something shifted. It started small. The way he would leave coffee brewing in the morning before I woke up because he remembered I wasn't functional until my second cup. The way he asked about my day and actually cared about the answer. The way he looked at me sometimes like I was precious. We started having dinners together when he came home from work. Sitting at the kitchen island, eating takeout because neither of us could really cook, and he would tell me about his day, the deals he was working on, the problems he was solving, and I would listen and respond, and somewhere along the way I stopped having to fake my interest. He told me things he said he had never told anyone else, about his childhood, about his father who drank away every paycheck, and his mother who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on, about being 14 years old and promising himself that he would never be poor again, that he would do whatever it took to build something permanent and secure. And I understood it in a way that terrified me, because understanding him made it harder to hate him. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a human being who had made terrible choices in pursuit of security. That didn't excuse anything he had done, but it complicated the simple narrative I had built in my mind. February brought snow to Portland, which was rare. The city practically shut down under 3 inches of powder that would have been nothing in other places. Marcus worked from home that day, and we spent it together on the couch watching the city struggle with winter. He told me he loved me for the first time while we were watching snow fall over the river, and I felt my carefully constructed walls start to crack. I set it back because that was the plan, to make him love me so the fall would hurt more, but when the words left my mouth, they didn't feel like a lie. They felt like a confession, like admitting to something I had been trying desperately to deny. I started having panic attacks, waking up at 3 in the morning with my heart racing and my chest tight, lying next to Marcus in the dark trying to remember who I was supposed to be, the woman who wanted to destroy him, or the woman who was falling in love with him. I had thought I could keep those 2 things separate, but they were bleeding together until I couldn't tell where the act ended and the truth began. I would catch myself laughing at his jokes genuinely, reaching for his hand without thinking, feeling content in moments when I should have been planning his downfall. In March he proposed. We were at Cannon Beach on a weekend trip, standing on the sand near Haystack Rock while the tide came in. The ring was a simple platinum band with a diamond that caught the gray Oregon light. He told me he had never believed in marriage until he met me, that I made him want to be better. And I looked at him with tears in my eyes and said yes. The tears were real, but I wasn't sure what they meant anymore. Was I crying because the plan was working, or because I was betraying myself? The wedding planning became my new reality. His assistant helped coordinate everything. We chose a venue at the Sentinel Hotel downtown, set a date for June, sent out invitations to his business associates and friends. My parents weren't invited because I had told Marcus we were estranged. A convenient lie that meant I didn't have to watch my father shake hands with the man who destroyed him. I called my mother once from a coffee shop and told her what I was doing. She was quiet for a long time before saying, "Be careful, Hannah. That kind of thing changes you." I told her I knew what I was doing, but we both knew that was a lie. I had all the ammunition I needed by then. Documentation of his predatory business practices, evidence of bribes and kickbacks, connections to politicians and inspectors who looked the other way. I had copied everything to a secure drive and drafted emails to journalists and regulatory agencies. All I had to do was press send and Marcus Whitmore would face consequences. His company would be investigated. He would probably face criminal charges. Everything he built would come crashing down the way my father's company had. But I kept hesitating, finding reasons to wait, telling myself I wanted the timing to be perfect when really I was just afraid of what would happen when I finally pulled the trigger. Living with him had become comfortable in a way that scared me. I knew how he took his coffee, black with 1 sugar. I knew he hummed unconsciously when he was working on something complicated. I knew he had nightmares sometimes about being poor again, and would wake up disoriented until I reminded him where he was. I knew he volunteered at a youth center in the neighborhood where he grew up, something he never publicized because he said real charity shouldn't be a photo opportunity. I knew he felt guilty about some of his business decisions, even if he never said it directly, and knowing all these things made him human in my mind, which made everything so much harder. April arrived with cherry blossoms blooming throughout the city, and I started seriously questioning everything. I would look at Marcus across the dinner table, or lying asleep beside me, and think about detonating his entire life. It would hurt him deeply. I knew that. Probably destroy him the way he had destroyed others. And wasn't that exactly what I wanted? But somewhere along the way what I wanted had gotten confused. I wanted justice for my family, but I also wanted him. I wanted him to face consequences, but I didn't want to be the one to deliver them. I wanted to hate him cleanly and simply, but instead I loved him in this complicated, messy way that made me hate myself. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in May. I was at the penthouse alone working on wedding final details when Marcus came home early. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking, and I immediately knew something was very wrong. He sat down on the couch and put his head in his hands, and I sat beside him waiting. After a long silence he started talking, telling me about a deal that had gone bad, a family-run business in Bend that he had acquired through his usual methods, but this time the owner had committed suicide, left a note blaming Whitmore Development for ruining his life. And Marcus had gone to the funeral that morning. He had never done that before, gone to see the aftermath of his business dealings up close, and it had shattered something in him. He talked about the widow and her 3 kids, about the things people said about him at the service, about looking at himself through their eyes and seeing a monster. I held him while he cried, and it was the first time I had ever seen him break, the first time he had been vulnerable in a way that couldn't be fixed with money or power. He said he didn't know how to be different, that predatory business practices were all he knew, that he had been doing it for so long he had forgotten there was any other way. I could have used that moment. He was cracked open and exposed, and I could have twisted the knife, but instead I just held him and thought about all the people he had hurt, including my family, about whether someone like him deserved redemption, about whether I had the right to offer it. He fell asleep eventually, and I sat there in the dark watching the city lights reflect off the river, and trying to figure out what kind of person I had become. I had started this planning to destroy him, and now I was the only person he trusted enough to show his wounds. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and I still hadn't decided what I was going to do. Part of me thought I should go through with it, marry him and then expose everything, maximum damage, let him lose his company, and his reputation and me all at once. But another part of me thought about the man who had cried in my arms, who was trying in his own broken way to be better, who loved me with an intensity that would have been flattering if it wasn't built on lies. I had all the evidence I needed to ruin him, but using it felt less like justice and more like becoming exactly what I hated about him. I started thinking about my father, about what he would want. I drove out to my parents' house in Beaverton one afternoon, when I knew Marcus was in meetings. The neighborhood looked shabbier than I remembered, houses that needed paint, and yards that needed care. My mother answered the door, and her face showed every month of stress she had been carrying. We sat in the kitchen that used to feel warm, and now just felt small, and I told her everything, about Marcus, about my plan, about how I had fallen in love with him and now I didn't know who I was anymore. My mother listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Your father wouldn't want this, Hannah. He wouldn't want you to destroy yourself, trying to destroy someone else." I asked if that meant she was okay with Marcus getting away with everything, and she shook her head. Getting away with it and you sacrificing yourself for vengeance aren't the same thing. There has to be another way. I left that conversation more confused than ever because she was right, but I didn't know what the other way was. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I got up and went to Marcus's office and looked at all the documentation I had compiled over months, every piece of evidence that could bring him down. I thought about sending it all, watching his world collapse, walking away clean, but my hands wouldn't move toward the keyboard. Instead, I found myself looking at other things. Photos of us together that his assistant had printed for the wedding slideshow, smiling and happy and real. When had it become real? When had I stopped pretending? Marcus found me there at 2 a.m, sitting in the dark, surrounded by ghosts. He asked if I was having second thoughts about the wedding, and I almost laughed because it was so much more complicated than that. I looked at him standing in the doorway in his pajamas with messy hair, and I knew I had to make a choice. I could destroy him and feel righteous and empty, or I could try something harder, something that felt impossible. I could try to build something real from all these lies. I told him we needed to talk, and his face went carefully neutral, the way it did when he was preparing for bad news. We sat on the couch where we had spent so many evenings, and I told him everything, my real name, my father's company, the plan I had made to get close to him and destroy him. I told him about the evidence I had collected, and the months of lies and how I had started this hating him and ended up loving him. When I finished talking, the silence stretched out so long I thought he might never speak again. His face went through several expressions: shock, anger, hurt, and finally something that looked like understanding. He asked to see the evidence, and I showed him everything. Watching him read through documents that detailed his own predatory practices, he didn't try to defend himself or make excuses. He just sat there absorbing it. Finally, he said, "You could destroy me with this. You still can." And I said, "I know." He asked why I hadn't, and I told him the truth. "Because you became real to me and I don't know how to reconcile the person you are with the things you've done." We talked until dawn. Really talked in a way we never had before. I told him about watching my father have a heart attack from stress, about my mother crying, about how his business practices had real human costs that he never stayed around to see. He told me about being so afraid of poverty that he became ruthless, about convincing himself that business was war and casualties were inevitable, about never letting himself think about the people he hurt because thinking about it would mean admitting he was exactly what his father had been, a man who destroyed things. The wedding was supposed to start at 3 that afternoon, but by 8 a.m. we both knew it wasn't going to happen. Marcus said he couldn't marry me under false pretenses, that I deserved to make a real choice, not one based on a role I had been playing, and that he needed to figure out who he wanted to be before he could ask someone to share a life with him. I agreed, because as much as I loved him, I wasn't sure if I loved the real him, or the version I had created in my mind during months of performance. We spent that day canceling everything, calling vendors and guests, returning gifts. It was exhausting and awkward and honest in a way nothing between us had been before. By evening we were sitting in the empty penthouse surrounded by wedding decorations that would never be used, and Marcus asked what happened now. I told him that was up to him. He had a choice to make about what kind of person he wanted to be, and what kind of business he wanted to run, and I had a choice about whether I could live with whatever he decided. Over the next 3 months, Marcus did something I never expected. He actually changed. He hired an independent firm to audit Whitmore Development Group and implement ethical business practices. He set up a fund to provide restitution to families his company had harmed, including mine. He personally apologized to my father, which was awkward and painful but necessary. He started saying no to deals that would hurt people even if they were legal. He took the empire he had built on ruthlessness and tried to reshape it into something that could do actual good. It wasn't perfect and it didn't undo the damage, but it was real effort, real change. I moved back to my own apartment because we both needed space to figure out who we were outside the lies. I went back to teaching, standing in front of 28 third graders and trying to remember what it felt like to be simple. Hannah Bennett, who believed in kindness, but I wasn't that person anymore. I had done things and learned things that changed me permanently. I had been willing to destroy someone I loved for the sake of justice, and that darkness didn't just disappear because I had chosen differently in the end. Marcus and I saw each other occasionally, coffee meetings that felt like first dates, slowly learning each other without the performance. It was strange and uncomfortable and sometimes painful. He was different, less confident and polished, still figuring out how to be powerful without being predatory, and I was different too, harder and more cautious, aware of what I was capable of. We talked about trust, and whether it could exist between two people who had lied to each other so thoroughly. We talked about whether love meant anything when it was built on deception. In September, almost a year after I had decided to destroy him, I sat in that same hospital waiting room where this had all started. My father was there for a routine checkup, and I was drinking coffee and thinking about how much had changed. Marcus texted, asking if he could see me, and I said yes. We met at Waterfront Park and walked along the river, while he told me about the latest changes at his company, about a development project that would include affordable housing, about feeling like he was finally building something he could be proud of. I listened and watched him and tried to figure out if I forgave him, if forgiveness was even mine to give. He had hurt my family and others, and no amount of change erased that. But he was trying, and that counted for something. He asked if I thought we could ever really trust each other again, and I said, honestly, I don't know. Maybe trust isn't the point. Maybe the point is choosing each other anyway with full knowledge of what we're both capable of. He said that sounded harder than trust, and I agreed. We didn't get back together that day or make promises about the future. We just walked and talked and existed in the complicated space between hatred and love, between justice and mercy, between who we were and who we wanted to be. I had set out to destroy Marcus Whitmore, and in the process I had destroyed and rebuilt myself. I had learned that vengeance was easier than forgiveness, that hate was simpler than love, that sometimes the person you become while seeking justice is just as damaged as the person you're fighting against. Looking back, I can't say I made the right choice. There are days when I think I should have sent that evidence and let him face full consequences, days when I think I betrayed my family and myself by choosing mercy. But there are also days when I think about the families receiving restitution checks, about the people who won't be destroyed by Whitmore Development's new ethical policies, about the possibility that people can change if someone believes they're worth saving. And on those days I think, maybe I didn't fail, maybe I just chose a harder path than simple destruction. My name is Hannah Bennett, and I'm 30 years old now, and I married Marcus Whitmore last month in a small ceremony at the courthouse with just our parents as witnesses. My father shook his hand, and it was stiff and awkward, but real. My mother cried, and I couldn't tell if it was happiness, or grief, or both. Marcus's vows included an apology and a promise to spend the rest of his life earning the second chance I had given him. My vows included a promise to be honest even when it was hard and to hold him accountable to the person he said he wanted to be. We both knew we were promising to do difficult things. I still have all the evidence locked away in a safe deposit box. Insurance maybe, or a reminder of what we both almost lost. Sometimes I take it out and look at it and remember the woman I was when I compiled it. So certain that destruction was the answer. So sure that justice meant punishment. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was right about one. Marcus Whitmore deserved to face consequences for what he had done. The consequences just looked different than I expected. He has to live every day knowing what he was and choosing to be different. He has to look at the families he hurt and make amends he can never fully repay. He has to be married to someone who knows exactly what he's capable of and who will never let him forget. And I have to live with what I did too, with the lies I told and the person I became in pursuit of justice, with the knowledge that I was willing to destroy someone I loved, with the understanding that I'm not the good person I thought I was before all this started. We're both living with consequences, and maybe that's the real justice, not destruction but accountability, not punishment but change, not simple endings, but complicated, ongoing choices to be better than we were. The other day someone asked me if I regretted any of it, and I said yes, all of it and none of it. I regret the pain we caused each other, and the time we lost to lies. I regret that my father had to suffer and that Marcus hurt so many families, but I don't regret learning what I'm capable of, both the darkness and the mercy. I don't regret choosing the hard path over the easy one. I don't regret believing that people can change even when they probably don't deserve the chance, maybe especially then. This isn't a happy ending or a sad one, it's just an honest one. The story of a girl who set out for blood and ended up with something more complicated. Love built on ruins and truth built on lies, and two people trying to be better than they were. Trying to deserve each other and knowing they probably never will. Trying anyway, because that's what it means to be human. To fail and hurt and choose to keep trying. To recognize the monster in yourself and in the person you love, and decide that recognition is the beginning, not the end. To understand that sometimes the cruelest punishment isn't destruction at all, but forcing someone to live with what they've done and who they've been and demanding they be better, watching them try, helping them try, and trying yourself to be worthy of the mercy you've shown. That's the weight we carry now, heavier than hate, more complicated than simple endings, more real than any story about pure good defeating pure evil, because life isn't that clean and neither are we.